Welcome back to another Caring Support podcast. This week, we have the lovely Natasha Halliday, and this woman is really amazing. She's in the Oshawa area in Ontario. We really love everything she's doing. It's making a big difference in things related to people's mental health, etc. So, without stealing any of that thunder, maybe you could introduce yourself, Natasha. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
So as you said, I'm Natasha Halliday. I'm a registered social worker. I have a private practice, so I see individuals for therapy ages 14 and up, and I support people with different mental health issues, life stress. Not everybody seeks therapy because they've been diagnosed with something. Sometimes people are just having difficulty navigating things in their life. They're looking for support, or they recognize they're not quite themselves and they're thinking, I don't want this to get worse and I don't want to get to the point where I have a mental health concern. So they're trying to maybe do some prevention support. So I see individuals kind of with that kind of range: depression, anxiety, life stress, life transitions, moving out of university into the workplace, retiring, maybe after a divorce, maybe contemplating a divorce, like any kind of thing that comes up where somebody is, thinking, I may not be able to figure this all out on my own.
Right. No, that's awesome. Thank you. So, what would you say is your favorite part about being a social worker slash registered, psychotherapist?
Oh, that's easy. It's people. I just love people. And it's fascinating because my role is to support people where they may be having struggles, but I still have so many beautiful moments where my clients offer sunshine in my life. They say something that is just wonderful, or just even being able to connect with people and seeing the resilience they have, the perspectives they have, the ways they still try to find joy in the midst of some really darker or difficult moments. I mean, I think that's a blessing to me as well.
Wow, that's awesome. And I love that. I know, caring support is community oriented platform, for instance, about connecting people, and it's about that interaction because a lot of times let's say the recruitment and hiring process becomes so regimented and all about what the facts are and your education, what's on the resume, black and white. And we're like, I think there's a lot more to it than that. And a lot of people are starting to realize it's important to look at emotional intelligence. It's important to look at how well are they going to build a team? How are they going to be as a team member, and how are they going to work together? So, yeah, appreciate what you're saying. That's totally, our language. So, what does a day in the life of a therapist look like?
So I actually launched my private practice a week before we went into lockdown. So I started with a virtual practice. I now have a hybrid practice, which means I often start my day seeing clients virtually. And then sometimes I might go into an office space that I rent. But usually what I find is, I try not to have more than 4 sessions in a row. I feel a little fried. And I also have to be cognizant, if I'm going to promote self-care, I have to practice it. So if I see my calendar starting to fill up, I put in blocks of do not book so that it can't be booked, which gives me some space to eat. Typically a day, I often start around 10ish in terms of seeing clients. And some days I work 10 to 5 or 6. Some days I work maybe a little later. I start at 1, I work till 8. But I'm typically in online or in-person meetings. Sometimes I'm doing some other support work where I might be connecting with other service providers in that person's life, or just, I'm very much of the, let's do some practical work too. You're struggling to find a job. What are the tools you're using to find a job? I love getting involved in that kind of stuff and taking some actionable steps as well. And supporting them to learn about job search banks or whatever it may be connected to what they're doing. So most of my day is spent in my individual appointments, where my clients are younger. Some of my clients in their teens. Sometimes I connect with their parents. I do have some clients who maybe are followed by a psychiatrist as well. And every once in a while, the client will give me permission to connect with their psychiatrist to give them an update, because the demand on psychiatry is so high that most psychiatrists can't spend a half an hour to an hour with a client. Whereas I'm spending most of the time 45 minutes to an hour with my clients. So I'm gaining more information and doing, a different type of work, but it's helpful what's the word I'm looking for? Continuity of care, to have the psychiatrist informed, if they've got a school social worker or maybe another healthcare or other person who's support person involved. The parties need to be connecting so that we're not repeating a bunch of stuff and leaving something undone, or just kind of disconnected and not knowing what's going on, and then maybe not offering the full service that we can because there's some disjointedness. So sometimes I'm connecting with other service providers as well to make sure that the client's care is the best that we can offer.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Good for you. And by the way, what you want to say is, oh, have you tried Caring Support to find your job?
There you
So,
go.
yeah, well, and understand that our focus, our niche is healthcare wellness. So it is social workers, it is, nurses, PSWs, but we're also ventured into the dental world. It is pretty expansive, but again, focused on health and wellness. So, a lot of times people struggle with job boards because they are going, yeah, there's just so many different industries. It's, I want to focus just in finding my next opportunity in healthcare because that's what they've been trained in or have experience in or maybe come out of school for or whatever it might be. So, yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to put that in there. Okay.
No
So,
worries.
yeah. So, what advice would you give to students, are wanting to get into your field of work?
Oh, they want to get in. It's funny because I'm actually teaching at Centennial College right now. And so I'm interacting with students trying to enter into child and youth care, which is where I started before I registered as a social worker. And, one of the things that I find both from working as a therapist and working with students is students put themselves under tremendous pressure to have their entire life figured out. And so they think that they've kind of got to have a 50-year plan. And, I often encourage people, let's start there. And we are always figuring it out. If you think about it like a GPS, you don't set a destination, get there, and then stay there. When you get there, you decide to go somewhere else eventually, right? So in the same way, you might put a goal ahead of you, you might achieve that goal, but there's always something else that you might be working towards. So
Right.
try to release that pressure to have it all figured out. I also definitely encourage practicing self-reflection, because if you're not understanding yourself, it's much harder to know what you're bringing to the work that you do, right? And it's
Yeah.
a skill that you want to be teaching your clients as well. So if it's not a skill that you've really honed, it becomes harder to then emulate it, model it, and to explain it and encourage it to others. So I often encourage a lot of self-reflection because we really, as in many fields, it can be challenging work, and you want to know, kind of have a really good understanding of yourself in terms of what you can handle, what you can't handle, right? There's such a diversity of things that we can do in this field. So getting to know what areas you might want to pursue, right? How do you explore those things? What do you do in terms of trying to learn those areas and really have a good self-care practice? Because when you're in the field of pouring out, you sometimes forget that you also need to be poured into.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of, I always say to people that when you're a giver, you have to learn your limits because those who take don't have any. And and I don't mean that negatively because not everyone who's taking, they might need to be mentored. They might need help. They might need, but there'll come a point when you're like, wow, I feel so exhausted. And that's because you're not getting people that are giving back to you. 100%. And it's very true. And by the way, like every 2 weeks, we do lunch and learns with schools because schools are part of what we involve in the platform. And, if a student or even alumni can be tied to their own school, and it's a fast, easy way for them to not only share profiles, no relationship required, bang, bang, bang. When people see it, they go, oh my God, this is such a great idea. Now, having said that, yeah, but when we do these lunch and learns, we not only show about our platform, but we talk about the top networking skills, the top interview skills. And you made me think of it on the interview skills because I always say to people, I says, know who you really are at the core in such a way that you can articulate that in a story that makes the people interview you do this, listening. And I guarantee you, I don't care if they interview 50 people that week, they'll remember you, right? But what is that message? What is that story? Like, how well do you really know yourself that you can articulate that confidently? and really let them know that you're going to be a tremendous and valuable asset. But I totally agree with you. You have to learn, okay, this is the area that not only am I passionate about, where I can really serve people well and make a difference in their lives. And as opposed to only, or trying to be everything to everyone and just be exhausted half the time.
Yeah.
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't think people realize how much knowledge of self is actually an employability skill and the ability to articulate what you do well. Because we often worry about being conceited or arrogant, but I'm like, what job interview are you not asked what your strengths are? So
Yeah.
you have to be in the habit of knowing how to respond to that question.
Yeah. Yeah. And that comes with, being prepared. And, and I always tell that to people, don't sound scripted, but just when you really know who you are, it's kind of like, when people share stories that they're excited about, they say it in such a way where they're just flying by the scene and like, oh my God, and then people are like, just listening to that, right? So, and I think, imagine if that was about your life and, 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 and having that impact. So, I think that's an important aspect. That a lot of people just don't focus on. Question for you. What does a mental health crisis look like?
So I just want to be specific. Are you talking about in terms of an individual or more like a societal mental health crisis?
That's a great question. How about,
Because right now the pandemic's highlighted where
yeah,
more
absolutely.
societal, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you for saying that. So I'll tell you what, maybe from a societal point of view, if you can sort of shed some light on that, and then maybe get into the actual, a given person.
Okay, so from a more like community-based, like societal perspective, I think a mental health crisis, I think what we're seeing is there's individuals who are having difficulties with mental health, and part of the crisis is the inability to respond in a timely and appropriate fashion.
Yeah.
Right? And a lot of that is still related to stigma. There's still tremendous stigma within healthcare itself. I worked for many years in hospitals and in emergency departments, and I was called to assess people sometimes because they didn't, they looked weird. Well, that's not a mental health condition, right? Like you can't pathologize somebody for being eccentric, but this is something that was happening within the healthcare system that I was working within that particular
Right.
organization, right? But what you often find, and I know from, sometimes working in the system is super stressful because you are trying to respond, but you're limited. So there's wait lists, and the wait lists it's how do you respond when people are in crisis when there's a wait list? So there are services for crisis, but then there's often a gap between the crisis response and then the longer term response. And it's figuring out all those pieces, figuring out at all the levels we need to respond. So how do we support within the school system? What do workplaces do to support their staff, right? One of the things that I'm hearing more and more is that managers and coordinators are often in supervision feeling like they're more a counselor than they are doing the management piece. And it's lovely that their heart is for that, but that's not their role.
Yeah.
And so what are the ways that they can partner with, organizations for either EAP or something else to support that? Because at the end of the day, a lot of people are really having a lot of difficulty, right? And I think even when we look at a societal mental health crisis, I think that should cause us to examine what are we doing in society why this many people are suffering with their mental health.
Yeah, no, very interesting points of view. So that kind of leads into the next question, which basically says, what things can you do to prevent your own, mental health crisis?
So I think this goes back to a little bit about what I said about, having a good sense of self and
Right.
having an understanding of who you are. And I always laugh that I age myself with this, but I go back to the tuner radios, the older tuner radios, right? Where there was the little slots, and when you're turning it, I said, if you think about this, there's static until it line up, and then you get clarity. I often equate the self-reflection and checking in with self like that. Because what we often do is we get up and we're like, I have all these things to do. I go, 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 go. And at the end of the day, we're not necessarily checking in with ourselves. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a daily practice, but what if we're not in the practice at all of saying, how am I right now? How have I been doing with, this crisis that I faced, or this disruption to my normal routine, or this, extra stressful situation, right? Because sometimes in the busyness of life, we don't realize the impact that it's having. And when we check in, we often get a lot more clarity about, you know what, I'm not as okay as I thought. Maybe I'm more tired than I thought, because we don't want to get to the point where we're shut down by sickness or something like that. And that's telling us. We're taught as children, butterflies in your tummy mean you're nervous.
Right.
We're not necessarily taught that throughout our lives, our bodies are probably giving us cues as to what's happening in our emotions, right? Not every stomach upset is a stomach upset. It could be telling you you're nervous. It could be telling you you're stressed. Not every headache is a headache because of whatever the reasons we get headaches for. Sometimes that's an indicator that you're stressed. So when it's not coming up obviously in your mind, sometimes your body's like, okay, I'm going to try and get your attention now and say, by the way, not everything's okay.
Yeah.
Right? If your sleep changes, if your appetite changes, are you asking yourself why? If it's for any, considerable length of time, are you asking yourself, why am I experiencing these changes?
Yeah, so that kind of leads to the next question, and that is, you're right. People need to really think about, why are these things happening? Why am I having this problem, this problem? I think a lot of times we just think, oh, we're gonna get past this. It's a temporary thing. It's the weather. It's, whatever it is. Maybe looking for excuses half the time, and maybe it's partly because we just don't want to have to deal with it or come to the reality of dealing with it. So, what steps should someone that is experiencing, mental health issues, what steps should they take to get the help, the treatment, et cetera, would you say?
I think there's a few options. They can maybe talk to a GP, or if they have a nurse practitioner that they're involved with, depending on what they are, maybe they don't even know where to start. So maybe having a conversation with them, or if they know somebody else who's gotten mental health support, talking to that person about, what steps did you take? It sounds a little, simple, but what about a Google search? Mental health supports in my area. Looking at, what are my options? Is there an employee assistance program available through my workplace? Understanding, albeit that those are designed for shorter term responses, but it is a fast response. Do you have benefits that might cover social work, registered psychotherapist, psychologist, to maybe get some therapy if you're thinking therapy is something that you could benefit from? There are things online where you can do kind of self-regulated modules where you can still get some information and then have kind of an asynchronous way of interacting with a therapist. So there are lots of options out there. Part of it is just, how do people know until they need to know, right?
Yeah.
And so being able to tap into the resources that they have, like I said, maybe talking to their GP, maybe checking with somebody they know who's had, mental health support. If they know somebody who works in the field, I've had a lot of people just be like, can you, answer a question? If you're in a parent forum on Facebook or another kind of forum, I've been in many groups on different social medias where people ask questions, and I'm like, hey, DM me and we can set up a time to chat. So there's lots of people out there are willing to give maybe a little bit more insight into what the mental health system looks like, how to get support, what the lanes are to kind of seek support. I know it can be overwhelming when somebody doesn't know, but that's part of why I say talk to somebody else about it, because if you're trying to figure it out all on your own, it may be too overwhelming.
Yeah. And this is all good stuff. And this relates to, let's suppose it's me and I'm going, okay, what do I do? Well, this is good information to know. Now, when it comes to other people, your friends, your family, and everything, and they know a person's their loved one or someone they really like spending time with is struggling. I know a lot of people, there's that fear of vulnerability. There's that, how do I have this conversation? How can I support them? How am I going to, maybe I'm going to be rendered as a jerk, or I'm going to say something that's rendered wrong. So, how can you support someone that's going through these issues, should you know of it?
Well, there's two aspects. There's you recognize something, but maybe they don't.
Right.
And so maybe you start a dialogue, not with telling them a lot of what you see, but asking questions. And in that question, you would say, I've seen some changes in you. Are you seeing changes in you? Are there things happening with you that are concerning to you? If they're already able to acknowledge, you know what, I'm not myself, there's some things going on. How can I support you? I may not be a mental health professional, but are you looking to get some support? Can I help you with seeking the support? Right? Or maybe they can tell you, I know somebody who you can talk to find out what some of the options are, right? It can be challenging and people get fearful of uncomfortable conversations, but people aren't necessarily looking to then say everything that's going on with them. It's just really nice for somebody to say, I see you. I see that things aren't okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not going anywhere. Like the relief in that alone is so much that, it's, and maybe being honest, I don't necessarily have the words, if you want to have a conversation, but I can listen, right? Maybe just being honest about that. I think people sometimes put so much pressure on themselves that they end up backing off, but not realizing then on the other side, the other person might feel more isolated. Because what if everybody's uncomfortable and backs off?
Right.
So just by being able to articulate, I'm still here, I'm going to be here, that might be really helpful.
Yeah. I really like that. That's awesome. I have a friend who's going through some challenges and I detected this and then he kind of opened up to me. And so really it's just about giving people the space and the capacity to understand that they are going to be heard, that we're just going to sit without any judgment and just listen. The last thing I would ever say is something like, oh, can't you just get over it? Like,
Yeah. You
really?
can't
You
get
know what I
off.
mean? No, yeah. I mean, and every one of us has been there at some point in time in our lives. So this is really great, Natasha. I mean, these are kind of my questions I had for you, and this has been very amazing. Wait, but let me ask something. Anything else that you'd want to share with us that maybe you thought, hey, this might be a benefit or whatever? Anything at all?
Well, just in the same idea of the last part that we were talking about, how other people can support people or what they can say, keep in mind, if you're witnessing somebody struggling with something that is not a struggle to you, please do not minimize it because it's something you manage better. You don't know how much is on their plate. There's no rule that we should all manage every stressor the same way. So
Right.
don't minimize something because you either don't understand it or because you handled it well. Be able to support them to say, if this is hard for you, then this is hard for you.
Yeah.
And don't, because I mean, that just becomes, people walk away with such feelings of, then, what's wrong with me? Why can't I handle this?
Yeah.
Our
It,
threshold changes day to day.
yeah. It's to me is like a almost a conversation related to empathy because I tell people, when you're working with somebody, the last thing you should do is saying, "Oh yeah, I had this problem." Whatever. You know what, man? It's making people feel like their problem is not really being heard, and you're not giving them that opportunity for you to just try to understand what they're going through.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's a case of the old adage that says we often have, we listen to reply rather than listen to understand.
Yeah.
And I always tell people that one of my favorite lines when you really don't know and whatever and not get people's backup is to lead with help me understand why you feel this way or whatever. Because very often you're right. And I think of Robin Williams. Robin Williams made everyone else feel great. And then, killing himself. I'm like, you know what? I bet you the warning signs were there. The question is, anybody really, really say anything? Do they take up on it? Or are they just, this guy's the entertainment center for everybody, right? So I think that's really a shame because we often lose great people and then think, well, what happened? I don't get it. No, I bet you the warning signs were there. We didn't want to do it, or we're not paying attention, or we're not, we're caught up in our own worlds or whatever it is. So this is why awareness and mindfulness is so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, yeah, Natasha, this has been really great. You have a lovely attitude and demeanor, and this is very valuable information. And mental health, it more than ever is a huge issue right now. Um, and
Absolutely.
yeah, and the pandemic really just, I think really in general, it just ripped the Band-Aid off of so many things where it's the healthcare system or anything and said, hey, here it is for what it's worth, no sense hiding it now because it's now in the open, right? Um, that hopefully will have some good things, because I say to people, it's how we respond or react to it is the biggest difference, right?
Yeah.
So, all right, Natasha, thank you so much for being on our podcast this week. Loved it. It's really great. Thank you
Thank you for
very, very
inviting me to
much.
be.
It was our pleasure.